Ramping up combat readiness. Reservists begin training like never before against a backdrop of increasing Chinese incursions. Putting pressure on Putin. The US president bans oil imports from Russia. We ask what China could be reading into the move as it eyes Taiwan. Leading the way. Taiwan's parliament tops the list in Asia for gender equality, but should it be doing even better? We talk to two lawmakers and drumming to a different beat, the percussionist with an innovative approach to the story of a legendary warrior. A warm welcome to TaiwanPlus News. I'm Yin Khvat. Taiwan's reserve forces are gearing up for 2 weeks of training in a new regime designed to improve the country's combat readiness. This comes as 5 warplanes from China entered Taiwan's air defense zone on Tuesday and as the country seeks to toughen its defenses. Jaime Ocon reports.
It's being called the toughest military camp in Taiwan's history. Over the next 3 days, these reservists will be hiking 22 kilometers while carrying weapons and other equipment. All part of Taiwan's efforts to bolster its defense capabilities, with reserve forces training extended from a week to 14 days.
我们也会安排在行军的过程当中有各种状况的处置，所以我们先把这个体能适应方面，先让我们的训员都能够体会。
More than 15,000 reservists will undergo this intensified training program. Taiwan hopes that a more rigorous combat regimen will help prepare the country's forces as pressure from China grows. On Tuesday, China sent 5 warplanes into the southwestern corner of Taiwan's air defense identification zone. They included 1 radar plane and 4 advanced fighter jets. So far this year, Taiwan has seen 49 days of Chinese incursions, with more than 220 military planes entering its air defense zone. As Taiwan seeks to improve its forces on land, sea, and in the air, it hopes to deter any form of conflict with its larger neighbor across the Taiwan Strait. Rick E. and Jaime Ocon for TaiwanPlus.
The US has rejected an offer by Poland that would have seen it give all its Russian-made fighter jets to the US for use by Ukraine's military. The Pentagon said the plan wasn't tenable and that flying combat aircraft from NATO territory into the war zone would raise serious concerns for the alliance. Ukrainian President Zelensky has called on NATO countries to give him planes after the alliance repeatedly refused his calls to enforce a no-fly zone over Ukraine. NATO has said it doesn't want direct conflict with Russia. On Tuesday, Zelensky became the first foreign leader to speak directly to British MPs inside the main parliamentary chamber. He was given a standing ovation, and he went on to evoke the words of Britain's own wartime leader, Winston Churchill.
Ми підемо до кінця, ми будемо боротися на морях, будемо битися в повітрі, ми будемо захищати нашу землю, якою не була ціна.
The director of the US's Central Intelligence Agency says he believes that the Chinese leadership is unsettled by how the Russian invasion of Ukraine has driven Europe and America much closer together. The West has come together to strike hard at Russia's economy. Beijing has said sanctions aren't the answer and blamed Washington and its allies for provoking the conflict. On Tuesday, CIA Director William Burns gave his assessment to an annual Congress Intelligence Committee.
I think the President Xi and the Chinese leadership are a little bit unsettled by what they're seeing in Ukraine. They did not anticipate the significant difficulties the Russians were going to run into. I think they're unsettled by the reputational damage that can come by their close association with President Putin, second by the economic consequences.
US President Joe Biden has announced an immediate ban on all Russian oil, gas and coal imports into the United States. The United Kingdom also announced an end to all Russian oil imports by the end of the year. It's all part of a push to weaken Russia's economy. I spoke with Marshall Reed, a program manager at the Washington-based Global Taiwan Institute, to find out how China could be viewing the move and the significance of these energy boycotts.
I think cutting off those exports would be massively significant. I think the US cutting off its exports or its imports from Russia is not necessarily massive for Russia, but I think it sends a strong signal to the EU countries, particularly the EU countries that have a very strong reliance on Russian natural gas, that this is the next step.
Turning to the Taiwan Strait, what do you think China is learning from the sanctions against Russia?
I think both of them, particularly Russia, but also Xi Jinping, were expecting a far less unified response to this, particularly on the sanctions side. And for a Chinese regime that has tied so much of its legitimacy to economic development, continued economic growth, seeing what's happening with Russia has got to be a bit of a shock and a cause for alarm. And I think this would really, in fact, impact the way Xi Jinping sees how the world will respond to a Taiwan Strait crisis. It's always hard to tell what Xi Jinping is thinking with regards to Taiwan, but I think this will certainly play a major role in determining when or if he launches some sort of contingency in the Taiwan Strait.
Are there steps China is already taking to protect itself in this situation?
China's been preparing for something like this for quite some time. They've been preparing to safeguard and sort of make their economy more resilient against these kind of external shocks. We've seen for the last couple of years, there's been a huge deal about China investing heavily in countries around the world to build these partners that have a strong vested interest in maintaining China's role in the global economy. So, I think this is a key step to protecting themselves from these kind of unified sanctions, where I'm sure there would be a major response from an invasion of Taiwan. But given China's economic influence and influence around the world, I'm not entirely sure how unified that response would be. I think there'd be a lot of countries and corporations that would be a bit more reluctant to pass sanctions against China.
And for Russia, its weakness is its oil exports. Is there equivalent for China?
A huge amount of China's vaunted economic growth over the past several decades has been fueled heavily by foreign direct investment from countries around the world, particularly in the West. So these are all things that could be targeted. Their energy sector as well. They still rely very heavily on imported gas and resources. So, China may not have the same single vulnerability that Russia has, but I think they'd still be very vulnerable to these kind of unified sanctions.
President Tsai applauded Taiwan's progress in promoting women's empowerment at an event marking International Women's Day. In her March 8th speech, she linked gender equality policies to an environmentally sustainable future. Tsai thanked those who continue to use their actions to smash stereotypes and break through society's preconceptions about women.
Let me take this opportunity to thank the women here tonight and across Taiwan for all that you do in ways big and small to improve this country and the world that we live in. I very much look forward to the day when faces like female president and women president are things of the past.
Taiwan's legislature has the highest percentage of female lawmakers in Asia. This year, it edged out lawmaking bodies in Singapore and South Korea with 42.5% women. TaiwanPlus's Rath Wang spoke to 2 lawmakers to find out whether Taiwan has done enough for gender equality.
When Lin Jingyi was elected to office in January, Taiwan's legislature became #1 in Asia for gender representation. But for the Democratic Progressive Party, or DPP, lawmaker, 42.5% women is not enough.
50 and 50 is our goal in UN, but I think the number is one issue. The real policy and the real participation is another issue. For example, many Taiwanese women, they do not like to get married because they need to fasten the culture in traditional families. You need to obey your mother-in-law, you need to have children, you need to have a song. So I think the most important is how we could do changing or encourage more different women to participate in culture changing, but encourage men to participate in culture changing to make real equality.
Ling is pushing for more representation outside of the legislature.
We encourage women to participate to our defense jobs. And we also have women members. But they are usually located in more, maybe we said, inner jobs, 内勤. They are fewer to be encouraged to really at the first line. Before, some issues they say that protect them because maybe they will get pregnant. Actually, that is an equality.
Ling says that in the past there were also policies restricting women in diplomacy.
We changing that in 2007, and we really have encouraged the female ambassador. So we have very more and more excellent female ambassador. For example, Xiao Meiqin.
Claire Wang, a lawmaker for the New Power Party, or NPP, has been using her position in the legislature to make Taiwan law more equal.
即便到现在，台湾社会仍然给予女性比较多的框架，像是刚刚提到的，是不是能够出差，你能不能专心工作，你结了婚生了小孩会不会就无心工作，以及说，结婚生小孩之后，家庭是不是责任就都在你身上等等。那过去我们在卫环委员会其实一直在推动的就是性别平等工作法的进步。那在上个会期其实刚通过的就是在于说，男性应该也要有陪产假，就是产检这件事情应该从怀孕开始，就是双方应该要一起来努力的，然后双方一起来照顾孩子的规划等等的部分，而不会是让女性单独去面对。
Wang is also tackling one of the most sensitive women's rights issues, abortion. Currently, women need the permission of their spouse if they are married, or their parents if they are not, to get an abortion.
最近正在提出来的是优生保健法里面，到底流产这件事情需不需要另外一半的同意？女性流产一定要经过男生的同意，其实也是加重，有可能变相的加重了女性的负担。像我们过去就有一些陈情案件，比如说她是单亲，甚至她是被家暴的妇女，她一旦怀孕，她又不能流产，那她又要同时假设她又要承担了家里的经济大任的话，其实对女性来说是非常辛苦的。
TaiwanPlus also spoke with legislator Wu Yiding from the opposition Kuomintang, or KMT, who was set to join the legislature's Education and Cultural Committee.
Traditionally, we think girls are not as good in science and math compared to boys. And they found out actually there's not much difference between boys and girls in terms of understanding math and science. So I think it's quite important in Taiwan's education to encourage girls to take more course in math, not be afraid of math at least, especially being the home of TSMC. I actually enjoy math a lot.
So as a former finance executive, how would you like to see the gender pay gap improve?
We actually pulled up a research from OECD. Among 42 countries, we actually ranked it 34, which is quite a bottom ranking. So it would be great if we can close this gap.
These lawmakers agree that there is still more to be done, but they are proud to lead the way in the region.
The female member in government of South Asia countries, she talked to me. Taiwan have a female president. It really encourage girls in their country. The girls are aware about, wow, so that is possible. We women are possible to become a leader of country. So I think a role model is really, Taiwan should be the role model in gender equality and human rights in our area.
Taiwan still has a ways to go to reach true gender parity in its legislature, but with the efforts made by women serving in the legislative body, equality is within reach. Klein Wang and Rath Wang for TaiwanPlus.
Coming up, South Korea goes to the polls in an election marred by bitter disputes. We find out what a change in leadership could mean for Taiwan. Welcome back. You're watching TaiwanPlus News. Taiwan's President Tsai welcomed Belize's Prime Minister to the presidential office on Wednesday. John Briceño was presented with a state honor for his role in helping to strengthen ties between Belize and Taiwan. Belize is one of Taiwan's 14 remaining official diplomatic allies. During the ceremony, Briceño expressed his support for Taiwan's international participation.
I proudly proclaim that we believe that the people of Taiwan have the right to live in peace as a nation fully recognized by the international community. We both have the right to live in peace with our neighbors and to participate in international organizations for the benefit of all mankind.
After weeks of intense campaigning, South Koreans head to the ballot box on Wednesday to decide their country's new leader. The economy, housing and gender equality have all been key issues, but the often toxic debate has led many to dub the vote the election of the unfavorables. James Chater reports.
Polling day in South Korea. It's been a bitter campaign, with mudslinging, a street attack on the leader of the governing party, and allegations of corruption.
소감은 그냥 오늘은 꼭 투표를 일찍 와서 하고 싶었고요. 이 이유는 정말 이번에는 국민이 원하는 대통령이 좀 됐으면 좋겠고 경제적으로나 전반적인 문제 부분에서 정말 공약하신 대로 조금 지켜줄 수 있는 그런 분이 됐으면 좋겠습니다.
Opposition candidate An Chol-soo pulled out of the race last week and formed a united ticket with the other conservative, Yoon Suk-yeol. That means the election is a two-horse race between Yoon Suk-yeol and Lee Jae-myung of the ruling Democratic Party. Party leaders cast their ballots in early voting alongside 16 million other South Koreans, a record. But both main candidates are unpopular, and that's led many to call it the election of the unfavorables.
Because this time, a lot of people think it's a kind of a selection between two rotten apples.
Much of that perception has stemmed from the often rancorous tone of debate, especially in relation to gender equality. Yoon Suk-yeol has vowed to abolish South Korea's Ministry for Gender Equality, and that's despite South Korea having the largest gender pay gap of developed nations.
각종 남녀나 혹은 빈부나 이런 격차 같은 것들이 좀 심하다고 생각했는데 그런 것들을 좀 해소해 줄 수 있는 사람으로 뽑았다고 생각합니다. 네.
Economic inequality and housing are also key to this election. Relative to income, average house prices in the capital Seoul are now more expensive than New York, Tokyo and Singapore. And not far behind concerns about the economy are South Korea's relations with the world. The ruling Democratic Party has been a vocal opponent of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It's pledged $10 million in humanitarian aid. But beyond that is the ever-present threat of North Korea. Pyongyang has conducted 8 missile tests this year. The winner of Wednesday's vote will take office in May. Chris Ma and James Chater for TaiwanPlus.
To learn more about what implications South Korea's presidential election could have for Taiwan, our reporter Ed Moon spoke to Seongming Cho, a professor at the Asia-Pacific Center for Security Studies in Hawaii, who specializes in the geopolitics of Northeast Asia. He started by asking how the two leading candidates differ in their policies toward China and the United States.
So the conservative camp candidate Yoon announced that if he's elected, his government will announce strategic clarity, that South Korea will more closely work with the US and South Korea will join the Quad. The progressive candidate Lee Jae-myung did not really mention about Quad, so he remains relatively ambiguous, but he's not likely to continue the Moon Jae-in government's policy that appears to relatively in favor of China over the United States. That is because of the overwhelmingly negative public opinion.
Japan is also a US ally and has been vocal in its support of Taiwan. Can you explain why South Korea is more cautious in its approach?
South Korea's economy is more dependent upon Chinese market. So because of this economic dependency, South Korea is more vulnerable for China's economic statecraft. And second, from longer-term perspective, South Korea has to consider China's policy toward Korea unification, but China can make the unification process very difficult for South Korea.
In the case of a war across the Taiwan Strait, what role would South Korea and more specifically US forces in the country play?
So in 2006, South Korea's Romulan administration and Washington, they agree about strategic flexibility of the US forces Korea. So in times of Taiwan contingency, the US forces Korea can move out of the Korean Peninsula under the assumption that South Korea agrees. But South Korea may well be hesitating, not only because of China's retaliation that I just mentioned before, but more for the possibility of North Korea provocation. But that does not mean that South Korea will not do anything to support defense of Taiwan. So South Korea and Taiwan, they share a lot of similarities in the industrialization and democratization history. But for the reason of North Korea threat, South Korea wants to wait until the last moment after the US forces Japan and Japanese Maritime Defense Forces and US forces Korea join the contingency first. And then South Korea will be ready to support.
Wu Peijing is one of the world's most celebrated marimbas. She's a senior member of Taiwan's first professional percussion ensemble, the Zhu Percussion Group. Most recently, she performed Mulan, the legendary tale of a heroic Chinese woman who takes her father's place in the army. And as James Chater finds out, it's a role after her own heart.
With 3 sticks in each hand, this marimba playing Mulan dramatizes an internal battle between love of family and duty to country.
这个是很棒，就是可以把这种这么经典的一个木兰，然后用音乐，然后用自身的这种在打击上的学习去转换给大家，我觉得非常难得。
走吧，心无惧，心无惧。
Mulan has become one of Chinese history's most famous tales. It tells the story of a courageous woman who impersonates a male soldier, all to spare her ailing father conscription to the army. In Zhu Percussion Group's recent production of the story, Mulan is played by the group's senior member, Taiwan's world-renowned marimbist Wu Peijing.
那当然，你在打大战的部分，他已经从军多年嘛，是一个将军，所以他的气度跟感觉就又不一样了。所以当我在演奏那个定音鼓的时候，我就觉得我就是一个大将军。
Wu Peijing has established herself as one of the world's leading marimbists. She's best known for her 6 mallet technique, where 3 sticks are held in each hand.
4指就要把这里撑住。
The technique gives access to a wider range of expressive color, but it's so difficult composers rarely write for it.
所以可以。
And there's a reason it's attempted by just a few.
那我的手很小，那个要把它握得很稳，其实不容易，所以就不断的尝试。那这个过程里边呢，其实经常我们的手就会摩擦、起水泡等等。可是练习就要经常的能够忍着这种一点点的这种痛苦，然后继续练，要很有毅力就是了。
Willpower and physical power. To train her hands to endure hours-long performances, Wu Peijing took up yoga and even Thai boxing. But once mastered, the sonic potential of the instrument comes through.
所有的演出里面，我只有1场自己没有边哭边演，其他几乎每一场都会一直就是在演出当下，你根本在台上就哭了。
And how do you face those moments when you feel overcome by emotion when you're on stage?
我 我一直觉得这是音乐的演奏非常珍贵的，就是真情流露。所以当这个音乐的要呈现的感觉跟那个内在的达到一个契合的感觉，就让它流泻出来，我觉得很棒。其实就是说，你如果没有那样的感受的话，或者是你没有感动的话，其实观众也不会感动的。
But more than that, performing Mulan has reminded Wu Peiting of her own perseverance throughout her career, and in particular, a near career-ending injury to her hand. For months, she even relied on friends to feed her.
然后去拿，根本没办法拿琴棒，慢慢的力量再重新建立，然后再又到那么灵活，这个就是要毅力支撑，要强大的毅力，对。然后这是我觉得，就是这种木兰的精神吧。
A fitting role for this resilient musician. James Rayner, Maggie May, and James Chater for TaiwanPlus.
Thank you for watching TaiwanPlus News. I'm Yin Khvat. We leave you with images of the Northern Lights in the north of Sweden. For more stories from Taiwan and around the world, please download the TaiwanPlus app. Stay safe and see you next time.